I was born into a life of hardship. My mother died giving birth to me, and my father, a humble bank clerk, was shot and killed during a robbery when I was just 9 years old. I never knew the warmth of a mother's embrace, nor the guiding hand of a father. Instead, I was raised by my grandparents in a small, run-down house on the outskirts of Chicago. They did their best to provide for me, but money was always tight. My grandfather worked as a janitor at the local high school, his hands calloused from years of hard labor, while my grandmother took in laundry and mended clothes for a few extra dollars. They sacrificed so much, yet it was never enough to keep hunger entirely at bay. I learned early on that life was unforgiving. By the time I turned 19, I had already experienced more struggle than most people face in a lifetime. I married young, too young, some would say, but I was in love. Mary was the light in my otherwise bleak world, and when she gave birth to our son, Matthew, I felt, for the first time, that I had a purpose beyond mere survival. But love didn't pay the bills. I took whatever jobs I could find, construction work, dishwashing, unloading trucks at the docks, but nothing paid enough to keep us out of poverty. Each day was a relentless battle against despair, and with every missed rent payment, I felt the weight of failure pressing harder against my chest. I felt trapped, suffocated by the hopelessness of our situation, and I knew I needed something, anything, that could change the course of our lives. That was when I saw the ad in the local newspaper. Caretaker wanted. Live in position. Must be willing to assist an elderly gentleman with household tasks and general upkeep. Salary negotiable. Room and board included. It sounded too good to be true. The address led me to a large, old house on the edge of town. The Victorian-style mansion had an air of faded grandeur, the kind of house that had once belonged to the wealthy but now bore the marks of time and neglect. The paint peeled in places, ivy crept along the stone walls, and the windows, though large and elegant, looked out onto the world with a forlorn emptiness. When I knocked, the door creaked open, and I was met by a frail-looking man in his late 70s. His name was Henry Whitmore. His voice was gravelly, his eyes a piercing blue, sharp despite his age. He studied me for a moment before nodding, as if making some silent decision. "You'll do," he said simply, stepping aside to let me in. The work wasn't difficult, but it was constant. I mowed the lawn, cleaned the house, cooked meals, and helped Mr. Whitmore with small tasks. At first, he was reserved, speaking only to issue instructions, but over time, something shifted. We began to talk. He told me about his youth, about the fortune he had built and lost, about the love of his life, Eleanor, who had died decades earlier. He had no children, no family left. He was alone in that vast house, surrounded by memories and ghosts of the past. A year passed quickly. My wife and son would visit the house often, and Mr. Whitmore took a liking to Matthew, spoiling him with small gifts and regaling him with stories from his past. In those moments, I saw glimpses of a man who had once been full of life, who had known love and loss in equal measure. I thought of him as family, but I never expected him to think the same of me. As the months passed, Mr. Whitmore's health deteriorated. He grew weaker, moving slower, his hands trembling as he reached for his tea. I could see the sadness in his eyes, the kind of sadness that comes with knowing one's time is running out. He never spoke of his illness, never admitted that he was dying, but we both knew. Then, one winter morning, everything changed. I arrived at the house to find the lawyer waiting for me. Mr. Whitmore had passed away in his sleep. He had been ill, though he never told me how serious it was. The lawyer handed me a sealed letter. Inside was a simple message: "Thank you for being there when no one else was. Everything I have is now yours. Take care of your family." At first, I didn't understand. But when the lawyer explained it all, my knees nearly buckled. The house, the land, the remaining investments, Mr. Whitmore had left it all to me. I went from barely scraping by to owning a mansion overnight. The sheer magnitude of it was overwhelming. I stood in the grand hall, looking up at the ornate chandelier, my heart hammering in my chest. This house, this life, it had all belonged to him, and now, somehow, it was mine. I walked through the empty rooms, the echoes of his presence lingering in the air. His chair by the fireplace, the books on his bedside table, the faded photographs on his dresser, all remnants of a life that had now passed into memory. I wondered if he had known, in those final days, that he was giving me a future I never dreamed possible. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up thinking it was all a dream. But then I look around, see my son playing in the yard, and I remember the kindness of an old man who had no one left but chose to believe in me. And for that, I will always be grateful. Life had taken so much from both of us, but in the end, it had given me something I never expected: a home, a future, and the knowledge that sometimes, family isn't about blood, but about those who choose to stand by you when no one else will. I still keep his chair by the fireplace, just the way he left it. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the fire is crackling, I sit there and imagine he's still with me, offering wisdom in his gruff voice, reminding me of the fragility of time and the power of kindness. And in those moments, I realize that Mr. Whitmore didn't just give me an inheritance, he gave me a legacy, one I will spend my life trying to honor.